Almost a month has passed since I told you about the Ukrainian campaign for strikes on Russian oil refineries. If the previous such campaign broke out due to the so-called energy ceasefire, which Russia still did not observe, then the current one does not think of stopping. The number of successful attacks beats all the records of this war. The Russian Air Force cannot somehow arrange an effective counteroffensive, and in different regions of Russia a gasoline crisis begins to expand, which directly starts to affect the situation on the front. During the anti-oil campaign, we'll discuss today's video. August's results are truly astonishing. The Okogoro resource counted 45 successful strikes on Russian rear facilities, out of which 14 hit the refinery, another 8 at oil bases, pipeline pumping stations, and gas infrastructure sites. In comparison, in August only 12 refinery lifestyle facilities were hit, and only 6 Russian defense enterprises were hit. In July, 11 were hit and 1 refinery was attacked twice. One reason why this attention is focused on refineries was voiced by Ukrainian drone specialist Sergei Flash by Skresnov. Here's what he wrote.
Все эти атаки – результат большой работы по поиску объектов по планированию маршрутов к ним. Почему именно НПЗ? Для дальних атак вполне возможен сценарий, когда из 20 БПЛА долетят, например, 2. Эти 2 дрона с зарядом в десятки килограмм не способны нанести серьезный ущерб укрепленным военным объектам или
Or by an enterprise, for example, under the ground. But at refineries, there are large, important elements on the surface that can't be transferred or closed. They are part of the technical process and are easy to extinguish. The same applies to all ground, stationary elements in the oil and gas industry. And to cause tangible damage to industrial and closed facilities, you need ballistic missiles or cruise missiles with a combat capacity of 500-800 kilograms. There's already a missile in Ukrainian arsenal, as we know, and new ones are coming up, which I mentioned in a recent video. But since the main defeat materials remain unnoticeable, the drones apparently give the most supply, the most fuel to the refinery. As I mentioned in one previous video about Ukrainian anti-oil strikes, it became clear even during World War II when the Americans and British had another problem. Earlier this week, primitive bomb flaring technologies targeted only 20% of bombs. At the time, the target was a circle 300 meters wide. It turned out German industry could not disperse in this way. Arms production in the Third Reich grew until mid-1944, while Allied command ignored refineries and fuel production plants. Preliminary strikes caused them to fall to the ground, with strikes taking them out of control for many months. As a result, fuel production in Germany declined significantly, and the economy, the German army, and aviation became inevitable. All of this possibly near the end of the war for many months. I've said this before and I repeat now. The strategy, tested temporarily and its long-term use, can at least create critical pressure on the Russian economy and the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the front. This is a fire in Russian oil factories, their terminals, and oil bases. They significantly limited the Russian oil sector. This significantly limited the war, Zelensky stated in an evening video message. To start with, we'll talk about how these kinetic sanctions work. We'll limit strikes in the past month, or the video would be too long since there are so many of them. On the night of September 5, a refinery in Ryazan was attacked by UAVs, reported Robert Moderbrod. Informations about UAV attacks in Ryazan region were confirmed by Governor Pavel Malkov. There are no injured or damaged residential or infrastructure there, he wrote, adding that debris, of course, fell on a certain facility. Astra reported, citing local residents, that a fire broke out after the Ryazan refinery's attack. According to the refinery's data at the time, a primary oil processing unit could have been damaged. This is at least the 4th attack on this refinery since early July, they wrote. Earlier, the refinery was attacking on the night of January 24 and 26, followed by February 24. In the same publication, Magyar reported a night attack on a fuel base in occupied Luhansk. It was reported that the oil base had become the key logistics hub through which Russian forces provide fuel to offensive groups in the Kupiansk, Izhumsk, and Kramatorsk directions. And that refueling began as a result of a general fuel shortage in the occupied region. Local sources claim the reservoirs were nearly empty and the area of the fire is minimal. However, photos and videos of the fire indicate exactly the opposite. Magyar reported a strike on the night of September 7 on the line to a production's LPDS 8N dispatcher station in the village of Nadopovichi in the Onechinsk district of Bryansk region. He emphasized that the facility has strategic importance for transporting oil products from Belarus, including the Smazarsk and Novopolotsk refineries, into Russia. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the fact of the attack aimed at reducing the enemy's Ukraine's offensive potential and complicating fuel and ammunition supplies to military units. As journalist Mark Krudov wrote, as a result of the attack, probably no tank was injured. Nevertheless, the damage could be significant. Local authorities haven't reported any casualties from the LPDS. Head of the Ministry of Emergency Affairs Peter Sayarth noted that the attack did not affect the oil pipeline Druzhba or the oil supply to Hungary. The previous raid on the LPDS in Nacke was carried out on August 29, according to reports, when the building of the pumping station completely burned down. Later, based on news satellites and images from the LPDS. In Nacke and Nacke analysts of the Dnipro-Asin Garbuz project, they reported that as a result of the raid on September 7, the station was damaged in 2 places. Also on the night of September 7, drones in Krasnodar Krai naturally fell on the territory of the Ilk oil refinery. One of the technological facilities caught fire, the region's headquarters reported. The Ukrainian ascent project Oko Gora published a photo of the satellite service monitoring fires NASA firms, confirming the fire in the territory of the refinery. Later, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces reported a successful operation on the Ilk refinery, carried out together with a certain number of objects of resistance between Chorny Iskra and Krasnodar Krai, as a result of which the low AT-6 unit was destroyed, with a capacity of 6 million tons of raw oil per year being processed. On the evening of September 8, Madar reported a strike on the fuel station in Turovo in the village of Penka in the Volodymyr region, an enterprise responsible for transmitting oil. Moscow Kalshivoy oil, a product of Pravat collected fuel. Research analyst Kyle Glenn published an image of the facility confirming the fire at the station's territory. Existing satellite images show that 2 tanks were damaged, according to the information source Dnipro-Asin Garbuz. According to sources from Astra and emergency services, 2 tanks and 4 administrative structures were indeed damaged at the station. The power plants were depleted. Workers were then evacuated. According to Union sources in Gur, on the night of September 9 in the Krasnoarmysky district of Saratov Oblast, the Kybyshev-Lysychansk refinery was set on fire. The facility also provided fuel for the Russian army. Local publics wrote about fundraising of workers at the explosion site, while propaganda traditionally called the incident planned exercises. These are the exercises in Russia. September 9, Governor of Belgrade Oblast Vyacheslav Gladkov reported a fire at an oil depot in the village of Prokhorovka as a result of attack. According to him, the fire was completely extinguished, there were no casualties, and reserves were damaged. In order to fight the fire, besides vehicles from the Ministry of Emergency Situations, fire trains were involved. NASA firm service showed the fire in Prokhorovka. On September 12, the departure point of the Primorsk airport in Leningrad region, the largest Russian oil refinery on the Baltic Sea, as a result of a UAV raid caught fire, reported Governor Alexander Drozdenko. According to him, more than 30 UAVs were destroyed over the area, more than the Russian Ministry of Defense counted. Later, Drozdenko wrote that open fire on the ship eliminated a threat to refueling, and there was no oil products poured into the refinery. Cargo station was also on fire at the airport. No one was injured at Pulkovo Airport. Restrictions on aircraft landings were imposed. 48 flights were delayed in total, 23 canceled, and 12 aircraft were redirected to the backup airfields, according to the media. Restrictions were extended for over 7 hours back. Then, according to Bloomberg, in August 2025, about 1,150,000 barrels of oil passed through the port of Primorsk and 330 barrels of diesel fuel per day. The agency noted that compared to refinery strikes at fuel stations, exports to Baltic terminals are not common. Sources in Ukrainian special services then confirmed the fact of a UAV attack. 2 ships were damaged as a result of the strike, as well as tanker Cousteau, flagged by Sierra Leone. His crew was evacuated and all technological operations in the harbor were suspended. According to Ukrainian sources, several oil pumping stations providing supplies to the harbor of the service terminal were also hit. Moreover, local residents found traces of oil spouted or oil products on the bank of the Finsk River in the village of Karaska, or Karasivka probably. According to Governor of the Smolensk region, Vasily Anohin, as a result of a raid on 42 drones in the region that night, and on September 12, there were no casualties or casualties to the infrastructure. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian OSIN project, Cyberborozhno, claimed that an oil base in the village of Kardamov, owned by the Lukoil Oil Control Center, geolocated the site. The oil base was once attacked on April 20. On the 24th, only 2 tanks from the 16th survived. On September 13, drones attacked the Bashneft Oil Company. The Novofinsk Bashneft New Oil Refinery and the Bashneft Refinery of the refinery are located fairly close to each other, about 3 kilometers from each other, more than 1,200 kilometers from the Ukrainian border and 1,300 kilometers from the closest positions of the Ukrainian armed forces installed inside her. At the moment, it is the most remote object of the tech, affected by a noticeable damage. According to the information of the Ukrainian military project, Cyberborozhno, a large-scale command drones of a large range E-300 Enterprise were likely used for the attack. attack. As the sources of Astra and the Russian armed forces reported, the high-profile drone, which attacked the territory of the Novel Tower, also known as the Novofim Refinery, hit the AFU-1 installation, damaged the gas pipeline and the flamethrower. Fire happened. Another drone fell on the Novate Tower, of course, the Ufim Refinery, hit the AFU-6 installation, damaged two gas pipeline and the flamethrower. Once again, I note how incredibly lucky Ukrainians are that the downed drones are flying lightly into that target, or rather, their debris, and not hit the only point they were supposed to hit. That's no big deal for the Russian army. On September 14, drones attacked the Kirezh refinery in Leningrad region, the only major refinery in northwest Russia. Reporter Alexander Drozdenko reported on the morning of September 14 that 3 drones were shot down near Kirezh, later clarified 104, and the fire in the refinery occurred due to debris falling, certainly been operationally eliminated. There were no casualties, at least according to him. The Ukrainian staff confirmed an attack on the Kirezh refinery. Earlier, Magyar reported a successful strike on the plant. Ukrainian Telegram channels posted photos and videos of a fire strike on the refinery. According to Okogoro Project, a strike was inflicted after a primary oil processing was reported. The plant's installed capacity is estimated at around 20 million tons of oil per year, and according to the Energy Ministry's data, this is the second largest refinery in Russia. This was not the first attack on Kirezh refineries. During the strike on March 8, 2025, one drone damaged a fuel tank. Later, it became known that Kirezh refineries suspended operations for key AT6 units. According to Reuters, almost 40% of the refinery's production capacity was affected. According to industry sources, repairs can take about a month. The plant plans to add 15–20% to the remaining units, supporting operations at 72–75% of full capacity. Finally, on September 16, the Ukrainian General Staff reported an attack on a refinery in Saratov. The strike was reported on the night of September 16 near the facility. According to the Ukrainian military department, the consequences of the attack are being clarified. Saratov refinery specializes in the production of gasoline, diesel fuel, oil, as well as various marks of bitumen, vacuum gas or technical oil, and so on. In total, more than 20 types of oil products. Enterprise is engaged in providing the needs of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the publication says. Governor of Saratov region Roman Busargin did not comment on the incident. Earlier, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported a downing of 18 UAVs over the Sabropol Krai, later clarifying that it is still about the Saratov region. The list will continue, and let me remind you, I did not describe the events of August 2, but the systematic problems with Russian air defense and possible consequences, even compared to the mentioned Z channels. The problems of Russia's fuel and energy complex, writes for example the channel Osvidomidal. These are not the problems of the most rich oil workers, but the problems of the entire country. Ukrainian attacks on tech are work carried out in the system, aimed at accumulating damage which can end up in a combined critical damage to the industry. However, attacks on countermeasures are growing in quantity, growing in volume. The Z-Channel Army can provide security from these facilities only if there's a shortage of air defense equipment. The Roskuridia doesn't have the necessary countermeasures for itself, and oil workers themselves have little access to air defense equipment, but they limit countermeasures at law level no matter who supplies weapons to them. Business itself would and could want to protect itself. For example, currently the most obvious, most rapid way to ensure security is via duty operations of anti-aircraft drones, along with targeting air objects of the LRS station and the RLS. But everything depends on law limiting drone operators from having combat units. People's approach, second oil, is inappropriate here, and any pocket has its limitations. That's why compensating for losses by Z-Radar, personally shifted on the final buyer, won't work. The situation requires initiative that will at least get the big business going and allow it to protect itself, writes Nacke. Before we move on to the most interesting part, I remind you that you can support this video with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help it move forward, and especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms. You can also support the channel financially on Patreon. The link is in the description, or by purchasing NVPN, a tool that bypasses blocks, lets you watch YouTube at full speed, calls your family and loved ones via Telegram and WhatsApp rather than the bad Messenger Max, and so on. Everything Putin tries to prohibit from you, you can do it on the internet, get independent information, exchange messages, and so on. All of this is possible with NVPN. Buy from the link in the description, and by buying it, you support the release of new videos. And just a reminder, it's not forbidden in Russia to buy or use VPNs yet, and we're moving on.
Что на Донбассе, что на территории Старой России. Так сложилось, что практически все мои друзья — это военная элита, вышедшая когда-то из штурмовых и разведывательных подразделений и усиленно начавшая осваивать БПЛА. Без исключения все эти...
All these people said that passers-by are responsible for the sky security in our cities, who could well end up at the Air Defense Academy, where they haven't been taught anything regarding the modern UAV use system. These incompetent people were called by other incompetent people to prevent enemy attacks on our strategic objects, like refineries and so on. Finally, after receiving Babla and Koreshek, they pull rubble and leave whole areas unconnected, and the birds are flying around. I've heard on the internet that Ukrainians bypass the system and have nothing to stop them. No, guys, to stop Ukrainians, you need to stop. Helping Ukrainians is a bureaucratic, full-fledged day-to-day when it comes to new tasks. A huge number of military specialists, including from the field of UAVs, are reading me, and they will not let me lie. We not only have known effective measures to counter UAVs, we also have all the technical means needed for this. Only one company has come to light about UAV strike operators' proposal to regularly attack their objects with empty drones to occupy all the equipment, including engineering units. These are modern security measures, reports conclude, hinting that Russian oil companies are also in no hurry to take responsibility for what's happening. This very general lack of responsibility in the background of unceasing Ukrainian strikes means that Russian gasoline shortages in occupied territories continue to expand. 20 Russian regions have already been occupied, according to the publication Moscow Times, since September 10. The fuel crisis will happen in Russia after Ukrainian drone attacks, and oil refineries are burning harder and harder, they conclude. Ukraine caught fire in Baikal and the Primory regions and in the occupied Crimea. It faced it in September in the Ryazan, Nizhny Novgorod, Saratov, Samara, Ulyanovsk, Penza, Rostov, Astrakhan regions, as well as in Kalmyk and Tatarstan, considered occupied territory. In addition, deliveries are recorded in Amur, Magadansk, and Sakhalin regions, Khabarovsky Krai, Yakutia, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, and in Chukotka. This is based on data of the Independent Oil Union provided by the publication Izvestia. Initially, the local nature of the fuel shortage issue, but now it's time to talk about expanding geography. More and more regions in Russia are facing deprivation, noted member of the State House Defense Committee's expert group Dmitry Tordev. He added that the shortage that first appeared in far-fetched regions is gradually spreading across the European part of the country. According to the president of the refinery, Pavel Bazhanova, the strike with supplies of 92nd and 95th gasoline has already led to the closure of a number of independent oil refineries in regions. Some don't work from gasoline refinery to gasoline refinery, while others have wound up with guns. As a whole, for several weeks now, refineries have been unable to receive reloadings from oil refineries, confirmed a member of the Russian fuel unit Ekaterina Sevkina. This is all Russian media, Russian Kremlin media, and Russian industry-level business people. As a result of a continued August attack of Ukrainian drones on refineries, Russia lost 17% of its oil processing capacity, or 1.1 million barrels per day, Reuters reported. A number of major refineries were completely shut down. The Novokuybyshev refinery, with a capacity of 8.3 million tons per year, the Saratov refinery 5.8 million tons, the Volgograd refinery 14.8 million tons, and the Syzhyn refinery 8.5 million tons. The total capacity of the refinery in August reached 6.4 million tons, becoming a historical record. In September, Ryazan refinery partially shut down, providing about 5% of the country's oil processing. Stopping refineries has led to an increase in stock price drops. At the beginning of the year, they dropped somewhere in the half, and in August, historical records were reassigned: 72.6 rubles per tons of AI-92 and 82.2 per tons of AI-95. According to the St. Petersburg International Alarm Stock Exchange on September 9, AI-92 traded by 71.8 per tons of AI-95 by 79, while according to sources, buyers who want to buy fuel at the exchange are over 1,000 and the proposed volume is very small. As a result, all games are sold instantly. The Russian government has instructed an oil company to launch reserve capacity monitoring plans for refinery repairs and starting manual settlement of fuel deliveries on railways to stabilize the situation for 2 months. Exports ban was passed. It didn't work the last time, so it's unlikely it'll work again. Russia can now reduce oil production via Ukrainian drone attacks. Transneft warned oil producers they might have to reduce their volume after Ukrainian drone attacks on exports and refineries, two agency sources told. The company has already invoked restrictions on fuel storage for oil companies in its pipeline system. The company told partners that if Transneft continues to wear cargo to infrastructure, it will have to reduce acceptable fuel volume, agency sources told. In August and September, Ukrainian drones repeatedly launched strikes on Transneft's Druzhba infrastructure, stopping oil supplies in Slovakia and Hungary. At the end of August, Ukrainian drones hit an oil terminal in Ust-Luga, and in September in front of the Primorsk harbor led by Ukraine. Both harbors were damaged infrastructure, causing operations to stop. Transneft didn't respond to agency requests. A particularly sharp situation occurred in Ukrainian-occupied territories, specifically in Donetsk region, according to author Tatiana Montiana, accusing the local unidentified Russia of its leadership. "We have a new attack. Donetsk ran out of gasoline," Montiana said. "Problems have been observed for a while now. There's essentially no fuel left. Wherever fuel appears, a huge line is built immediately. The situation looks like water, and it's clear that the main reason is the war, but there are nuances. The refineries, oil depots, and so on are being bombed across Russia. The fuel production dropped by 17%. Everything is logical and clear. But at the same time, various regions face the problem to varying degrees. And when the Middle East suffers where fuel is simply far from expensive, or Crimea, which is also at the very end of the logistics chain and not the most simple, it's clear. But when fuel disappears in Donetsk, though, for example, in the east, there's no shortage there, it's already one war, can't be explained, writes Monty. The likely case is who controls certain regions, reading reports about raids on the refineries. The refineries understand that fuel problems arise and take measures. Unfortunately, in Donetsk, instead of leading the OMM branch named Sergei Lavrozy, objectively existing problems are already familiar with the nature of the catastrophe. Monty means the current so-called head of the region, Bipe Sadashirin, once famous, who once advanced the famous financial pyramid in Ukraine. But if you want to hear more about what's happening in the occupied territories, especially in Donetsk and Luhansk, watch my post from yesterday, my video where I talked about the real crisis. In the gasoline crisis in the occupied territories, if solving the problem with war is that easy, then maybe a formal question for the long-term Donbass could be slightly corrected, writes Madian. Of course not, because then the Kremlin would have to deal with its own formal incompetence. Moreover, the lack of gasoline is already striking at the military, and Ukrainian drones are also striking at them when military vehicles are built later on the gas station where some wonder appeared. Some colleagues claim that the fuel crisis does not affect combat operations in any way. It's because military vehicles all operate on diesel, which is fine in Russia at the moment and would take much longer to run out, even given the current intensity of the strikes. But all the small logistics of the front line, where the truck won't go through, and kilometers not getting close to FPV, personal volunteer transport to Buckhansk, most generators for drone charges in electronic warfare, and even the drones themselves, the shods, operate on gasoline. Speaking broadly, gasoline primarily depends on the opportunities that the Russian Ministry of Defense can't provide, at least not to everyone. It's these opportunities in the changed conditions that play a decisive role in combat operations. That's why the gasoline shortage has a disproportionately large influence on the front situation, if we compare it with the percent of use in the army compared to diesel. Another Z author, Anastasia Kashavarova, also reported problems with gasoline in the army. But I won't repeat it again, take a look at that video. Basically, it says that soldiers are building lines at a gas station which they then fly over, and they build lines at civilian gas stations already paid for by buying the necessary fuel. So yes, Anastasia Kashavarova confirms that soldiers are actively using gasoline. So I think all the stories say that strikes on refineries and oil depots are not affecting the front. That's quite the disputed statement, at least.
Влияют на фронт. Мне кажется, это довольно спорное утверждение, по крайней мере, я бы посмотрел аргументацию.
From my point of view, now regarding Anastasia Kashavarova, who still complains about buying gasoline for 200 rubles, I think she's right, and she doesn't have to struggle with gasoline for 200 rubles per liter, so there isn't any gasoline left in occupied territories. If we look at the Ukrainian campaign's strategic, we can note that it contradicts one of the most vulnerable areas in Russia's economy and logistics. Our entire relatively comfortable modern world is held by difficult supply systems, each of which has a certain stockpile. Ukraine. Our supply system has come to a standstill during Russian 2022-2023 attacks, but Russia hasn't managed to achieve social collapse then. Hits on Russian oil production can bring it close if pressure isn't supposed to decrease, but intensify. Let's finally remember that compared to Russia, Ukraine is waging a real war of exhaustion. Hitting the enemy's rear points, holding the front line is a highly viable strategy. Ultimately, gasoline shortage is not the only crisis factor in Russia's economy. It is it that can end up being the last log, which would convert too quickly the cold of the economy, as Russian officials say, into a full collapse, forcing Russia to request peace on Ukrainian terms, or at least sit at a negotiating table with proper readiness. In any case, we'll keep watching these strikes in daily reports, as well as check the hours once in a while, maybe once a month, because again, F***CKS**T, in September everything continued not worse or perhaps better than in August. Russian refineries fly by almost every day, and let them continue. This was Michael Nacke with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.